for Lynne McTaggert.
We've got some fun things we're going to do tonight. I'm going to tell you about how I stumbled on the information that I stumbled on in The Power of Eight, the attention effect. And I'm also going to let you experience it, because all the talk in the world really can't substitute for actually feeling the magic that goes on with a little group of 8 intending for each other. So are you ready for that?
Yes.
Okay, so let me tell you how this all started. I started out from a really odd perspective, because most people had described intention as essentially telling the universe what you want. You do that, you get it, right? That's all of what we heard with the law of attraction, with The Secret. Remember? This is The Secret.
It is you just placing your order with the universe. It's really that easy.
It's that easy. And what they're really saying is, you tell the universe, I want, and you get. That's pretty much what you said. You put your order out to the universe and it provides. So I had a big problem with all of this. As you probably know, I'm a journalist by training. I'm not a scientist. And when all of this was brewing around about the power of intention, I was pretty skeptical about it. I did not believe it. And so but nevertheless, I had written The Field, had Belt, and in there had been, I'd interviewed a lot of scientists who had worked on material demonstrating that consciousness is an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. So the journalist in me wanted to know how. You know, I had a lot of awkward questions about this. You know, how far can you take this? You know, can we cure cancer with our thoughts? You know, or are we just talking about a slight shift of a quantum particle? And also, what happens when lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time? Does it magnify the effect? So I decided to put this to the ultimate test. By then, I knew loads of scientists in consciousness research after doing The Field. And I also had, The Field was in 30 languages by then, and I had lots of readers around the world. So I thought, if I just invited them to be part of this intention experiment, we'd have the largest global laboratory in the world. So that's what I did. I had all that evidence about the power of intention, but not much had been done about the power of group thought to actually affect something. There had been passive studies, like the transcendental meditation studies, showing that when there's a critical mass of meditators, it looks like the violence goes down, the crime rate goes down. But nobody had actually looked at what happens when a mass of people are trying to intend for something to happen. So I worked with a load of different scientists. And we ran 30 experiments, and I used different scientists from the University of Arizona, Penn State University, University of California, Russian, the St. Petersburg Technical State University, Freiburg University, so that we couldn't be accused of skewing the results. I was really skeptical we were going to have a result. But the bottom line was, it worked. It really worked. Of the 30 experiments we've run to date and calculated, 26 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. And just to put that in context, there's no drug out there, no pharmaceutical drug with that kind of consistent, positive track record. So we started out small. I started out with doing things on leaves and seeds with Dr. Gary Schwartz of the University of Arizona, a noted psychologist. And one of my favorite studies had to do with seeds. And what we did is the scientists were very good about creating controlled experiments. So they would create 4 sets of seeds with 30 seeds each. And they would send us the photographs of these seeds. I would then ask my audience, my actual audience, if I was speaking somewhere, or my internet audience, inviting them to be all part of this experiment, which we did once, to choose one of the sets of seeds. We would. We wouldn't tell the scientists which ones we chose. We'd send intention to those seeds, A, B, C, or D. We'd then tell the scientists we were done. They'd plant the seeds. They'd measure them 5 days later. And then only after they'd finished all their calculations would we tell them which seeds we'd sent intention to. So we ran this study 12 times. 6 control-type studies, 6 control studies, and 6 that were the normal studies. And every single time, the seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than controls. Now, let's just unpack this for a second. The first time I ran this was in Sydney, Australia, among an audience like this, but of 700 people. The seeds were sitting in a lab in Tucson, Arizona, 8,000 miles away. About the same, a little bit more than that, 10,000 kilometers away? Plus, we weren't sending intention to the seeds themselves, but only a photographic representation of the seeds, their photograph. So this got me thinking that essentially, when we're sending intention, we create a psychic internet of connection. So that was pretty amazing, but it's not the point of this talk. It's not the point of the story. But I moved on. I went from seeds and leaves to water. We did loads of studies of water, trying to change all kinds of properties, including the pH. I was invited in 2010 to do a big experiment with the late Dr. Masaru Emoto on a real live lake in Lake Biwa, Japan. And we wanted to see if we could change the pH of water. So Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, the famous inventor of the GDV machine, who has been measuring subtle energy for years and years and years, was there and decided to measure the response. And we wanted to see if we could change pH. So we asked everybody to imagine moving the pH up 1 toward more alkaline to make it purer, and also to imagine the water like a mountain stream. And my husband and I had actually gone out on the lake, got samples of water, brought 2 samples back to Dr. Korotkov, who measured one of them, and measured the other one as the control. And the one we were sending intention to, we had the audience send intention, while my internet audience around the world was also looking at a photo and sending intention. And we moved it by an entire pH. Very cool. Not the point of the story. I was trying to figure out, I knew as a journalist, I thought to myself, well, I'm moving into personal development territory here. I suppose I should run some workshops. So my husband and I were kicking it around one day, and I'm saying to him, I don't know what I'm going to do. How do you show people how to manifest something with intention, the power of intention, over a weekend workshop? Well, I don't know. I'll put them in groups of 8 and ask them to send intention to one of the members of the group with a health challenge. And we will, we'll see what happens. And he said, yeah, I love it. The power of 8. He's a good headline writer. So we tried this in Chicago, 2008. And we put people into groups. And we told them to hold hands and be in a circle. And I played some music. And I was totally making it up as I go along. Because I'd never done this before, and I had no background or no information about what you do. There wasn't a precedent for it. So I sent them away and said, come back the next day. Tell us how you did. A woman with arthritis, terrible arthritis, said that she had no more knee pain. Somebody else who had migraines their whole life said there were no more migraines. Her head felt clear for the first time in years. Someone else who always had problems with insomnia slept like a baby. Someone else with terrible stomach problems had his IBS over with. Somebody else who said he was very depressed felt better than he'd ever felt. What was going on here? I had no idea. And what I did was say, this is a placebo effect. And I just rejected it. I did not believe it. That's one reason it's taken me 10 years to write this book. I did not believe it. I was the ultimate doubting Thomas here. So I went back to my experiments with renewed fervor. And even while I was doing that, I was doing these Power of 8 groups everywhere in the world, and still people were having these effects. I didn't get, as it was going on, what people were trying to tell me, like Rosa, who said, after she was part of a Power of 8 group, I felt like I was giving and receiving healing, like I was healing myself. I missed the lead of the story. So I went back to my studies and I renewed myself with all of that, and I said, right, let's do this, let's make it scientific. Let's do something huge. Let's try to cure violence somewhere. Let's make violence go down. So I started looking around the world for a place that was having a war. I finally find Sri Lanka. 25-year war going on there. The rebels and the government, nobody was winning. In fact, the government was losing. And the rebels had taken over the whole part of the north. And I worked with a team of scientists this time, including Dr. Jessica Utz, who is a professor of statistics at University of California, real expert in consciousness research, statistics. And she is the one who told me, you need at least 2 years of data about injuries and deaths, weekly injuries and deaths, and then a few months afterward. Because what you want to show is, if you show that violence went down the week after, that's meaningless. You've got to show that the trend was going up and you bucked the trend and it went down. So we did this. We sent intention over 8 days. And yes, injuries and deaths drastically fell, but not at first. During the week of our intention, it quadrupled. Injuries and deaths quadrupled. I was hysterical about this. I was so worried. I wondered, oh my God, did we do this? But then they fell drastically, and something else interesting happened. Within that very week of our intention, the government won a few decisive battles, enabling it to turn around the entire course of the war. So that within a few months it had recaptured the north, and within a few months after that, that 25-year war was over. I said to myself, did we do this? Who knows? However, something more interesting happened. When I started survey my participants, I send out the survey and back come messages like this. It's as if my brain is wired to a bigger network, said one person. And thousands of other people said similar stuff. I felt like I stepped into a palpable stream of energy. And it was along her arms and hands, which felt like it had direction, force, and mass. Somebody felt like they were really in energy. People were saying that they were tingling and having goosebumps. People were crying uncontrollably. Some people said they had a strong current. Some people said they felt a force field, like being a part of the tractor beam in Star Wars. And then it ended as soon as the experiment ended. Then afterward, it was even weirder, because I asked them, well, what's happened in your lives? And about half of the people said their lives had become more peaceful. They became closer to loved ones. They felt they were mending estranged relationships. They had a renewed life purpose. A whole bunch of them quit their jobs and got involved with much more exciting work that they'd always wanted to do. They were healing their lives, but mostly, they said, they were closer to strangers. People were hugging strangers. How can this be? These were the participants. They weren't the recipients. What is going on here? So I carried on with my peace intention experiments. Once again, a little nervous about all of this. But this time, it was the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And I don't know about you, but I was pretty tired of those buildings coming down, right? Those towers coming down, which we saw every year as Americans on television on the anniversary. I was determined to do something else. So I knew exactly who I was going to contact, a guy called Dr. Salah al-Rashed. He's like the Deepak Chopra of the Middle East. And I've spoken in the Middle East, I've spoken around the world, but I've spoken in the Middle East a number of times. And he's always hosted me. He has a big following. He's a very big peace advocate. And he has a big following throughout all of the Gulf states of Arabs. So I thought, right, let's invite him to have his Arab audience to join forces with my Western audience. And let's send intention to a place that has mutual benefit. So we decided to send an intention to those the two provinces on the bottom to the left in southern Afghanistan, which were the Taliban stronghold. So I invited the Arabs, and we had thousands and thousands of Arabs, thousands and thousands of Americans and other Westerners and people around the world all coming together to do this. And when you looked at all of the data, it demonstrated that all the casualty rates from every angle were down. Civilian casualties down, enemy attacks down, attacks in the southwest where we were focusing down were incredible, 790% down in September, the month of our intention. And attacks down about 10% over the 9% over the entire year. Not true for the rest of the country. This was focused on this area. So that was pretty interesting. But what was more interesting to me was what was going on with the participants. Because I had a live messenger, I had a daily broadcast about it on the web, and I had an instant messengering service, and the Arabs and the Americans, I soon realized, were writing to each other. They were messaging each other. They were Facebooking each other on my Facebook page. They were saying things like, "Your God is my God." They were forgiving each other. They were forgiving each other. We were winning the war in another way. So this all made me think about intention, having an amazing mirror effect. That the whole idea of group intention affects not only the recipient, but the senders. There's something powerful and circular about these group effects. So I wanted to find out where this came from, because I figured to myself, I stumbled on this. I did not think of this. Somebody had to have thought of this before me. Who? So I started looking through all kinds of esoteric religions. I started looking at the earliest circle of, one of the earliest circles of them all, Stonehenge. I talked to architects about Stonehenge and said, you know, did people get in a circle to do healing? Because they said, there have been all kinds of ideas about Stonehenge. That was a great big calendar, that people came there to mark the solstices, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, but they also found ruins of people, of cadavers and things, making them realize that this was also a place where people who were ill came to be made well. It was like old-fashioned lords. So I asked them, well, did people get around the circle? They didn't know. I said they had no evidence to demonstrate that the people were as important as the stones. So I looked further and back further, and what I found was a little-known sermon by a minister who said the Bible had been mistranslated. In the part of the Bible, the Acts, involved with talking about how the apostles took the teachings of Christ after he had ascended to heaven and brought that into the world and started the new church. So the word he was talking about it's been translated in the King James Version of the Bible as the apostles, when they prayed with one accord. Now that's a very anemic phrase for the original. The original was a term, the Bible was written in the Hellenic Greek, and it's been translated and translated. The original term was an adverb, homothumadon. And what that is an adverb that actually means, it's a musical term that means passionately, but with one voice. Think of a Beethoven symphony. Think of all that collective, that instrumentation that's individual, that comes together for a collective sound. That's what it was. The apostles, when they prayed, Jesus told them all the time, it's about 12 to 15 times, it's written in the Acts. When you pray, pray with one voice. Pray together. And I thought about it and I thought, wow, maybe this wasn't the power of 8. For him, it was the power of 12. Jesus said, when you pray together, you will be able to heal and you will be healed. I was blown away by this. Maybe power of 8 groups were invented by Jesus Christ. So I thought about this whole idea of praying ecstatically with one voice and thought, yes, maybe it's that power of amplification that happens when people come together. But the journalist in me was still not satisfied. I wanted to tease this apart a little bit more. Why does it work? Is it the intention? Is it the fact that you're intending for someone else? I mean, it didn't have to be the recipients who got well. I can tell you about a guy called Wes, who was in a Power of 8 group I set up at the Mile High Church in Denver, Colorado. Once, I asked people to be part of 2 groups that I was going to do this little thing with. I guess this was late August, September. So Wes was one of the people that did this. And he did not put himself forward to be a recipient of this group of 8. Some other people, he felt that they had harder problems than he did. Wes had had a really tough life. He had had all of the dreams. He was 65 now. He had so many dreams as a young man. He wanted to be a scientist. He was at university studying to be a scientist. And in the last year of his university time, he got drafted to go to the Vietnam War. And at the time, there were no university deferments anymore. If you got called up, you had to go. So he went. It was so horrific an experience. He dropped out of college, never finished, came back, was depressed, and his life kept spiraling downward, worse and worse. By the time I met him, he had got to the point of saying, what's the use? What's the use? Nothing ever good happens in my life. He does an intention for someone else. She's a woman with cancer. And I talked to him a few weeks later, and he says, it's unbelievable. My life has completely turned around. I wake up with joy every moment. I wake up with joy. I have ease in everything I'm doing now. And I thought to myself, my God, it doesn't matter if you're a sender or a receiver. You're still receiving, just as Rosa told me all those months ago. So I was still wondering about all of this. So I decided the journalist in me, the investigator in me wanted to tease out, what's the X factor here? So I decided to hold a year-long Power of 8 group. And I put together a group of about 250. And I monitored them month by month over the year to see what happened in terms of their health, their relationships, their career or hobbies, or generally how they spend their time, their focus, and their life's purpose. And I watched as extraordinary things happened. Andy, for instance. Andy was going through a divorce. She'd sold her gift store business, and she needed other income. She had 2 small children. So she kept intending, and her group kept intending for her. And with these Power of 8 groups, I had put all these people into little groups of 8 and had them intend for each other every week, week after week after week. And with Andy, everything her group did, nothing was working. Nothing was working. She was not getting anywhere with her business. She was worried about income. Just things weren't working for her. So I finally, in a moment of frustration, just said to her, Andy, get off of yourself. Stop intending for yourself. Intend for someone else. And I had another person in mind, a young guy who was, he was a young boy who was, he was 15 at the time, and he'd had a girlfriend, his first serious girlfriend, and he, in a fit, as she broke up with him, and in a fit of adolescent existential angst, he threw himself off of a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. Every bone broken, he had nerve damage, he had brain damage, didn't look like he was going to live. So I had all of my intention masterclass people start intending for him over 3 successive weeks. And it was incredible. Within a few weeks, he was up on a wheelchair. A week or so later, he's there back. You know something's right if he's on his social media pages already. And here he is with his pals on his birthday. You know, the hospital can't believe what was going on. And the intentions, his changes oftentimes corresponded exactly with the times we were sending intention. And with a few weeks later, there's Luke back home again. Maybe we did that. Maybe it was just good doctoring. But here's what I know. The moment Andy got off of herself, the moment she started intending for Luke, within a few days, she gets an offer completely out of the blue for a dream job. When we do something good, when we do something for someone else, a whole amazing system happens. It turns on a thing called the vagus nerve, which is, you know, if oxytocin is like the love hormone, that's the hormone that gets released when with mothers and their babies, and when they're breastfeeding, and when people are in love. Well, the vagus nerve is the love nerve. It gets turned on when people are connected, when they're doing something altruistic, when they do things for people who are, you know, just deserving of help in some ways. And this nerve is very interesting because it attaches to every major organ in the body. And it has an amazing effect on the immune system. It keeps refreshing the immune system. It's like a virtuous circle. It keeps improving. So the idea that altruism could do something amazing like this started to catch fire for me. And I started thinking, this is a really important piece. And I came across all kinds of studies. I mean, there was one really interesting study run by a psychologist priest who wanted to see if prayer could be used to help people with depression. I mean, prayer has been used for a lot of physical illnesses, but never for mental illnesses. So he recruited over 400 people who were suffering from depression. And he divided them into 2 groups. One group got the prayer, they got prayed for. And the other group, who were also the people with depression, they did the praying. And afterward, the psychologists started measuring using all kinds of measuring devices and scales, measured how they did. And he found that the people who got the prayer did pretty well. They were really improved, but not anywhere near as improved as the people who did the praying. Prayer was good for them, but as long as it wasn't about them. So that was really interesting to me. I started thinking, it's really, that getting off of yourself piece is really interesting. And I found one study that really answered it for me. It looked at the difference between people who were living what Americans would call the American dream. They were people with lots of money, they were going on holidays, they had all the money and things that they needed, right? They were pleasure seekers. And they also looked at a group of people who were less affluent, but also were living a life of service. So their marker was to look at their immune systems. The pleasure seekers who had all the money in the world, all the time in the world, no stress, terrible immune system markers. These people were instant candidates for heart attack, for Alzheimer's, for diabetes, all of those degenerative diseases. They were going to be dropping like flies. The people who were living lives of service, on the other hand, they were doing fabulously. They had immune systems that were really robust. These people were going to live forever. And it started me thinking about the danger of what had been talked about in the whole self-help movement about intention and the power of intention. I want, I get. I want, I get ends up being I get sick. I realized that self-help itself, that term self-help, was possibly dangerous too. Real healing occurred when people got off of themselves and started intending for someone else. So I started thinking, maybe it's not just do unto others. Maybe it's think unto others. Maybe that whole idea of intention for someone else is as powerful as anything we can possibly do. Maybe that's why these little Power of 8 groups are so potent, because it doesn't matter whether you're a sender or a receiver. You're always receiving. You're always receiving. And in that moment of connection, of being larger than yourself, of being part of a little community, of being part of something that is just pure love and transformation. All of these people were describing this incredible feeling, which is essentially the absolute description of a mystical experience, or what the Course of Miracles calls the holy instant. That feeling, that amazing feeling of being totally, totally connected and at one with the universe. The parietal lobes, those things in green, are the parts of the brain back here that distinguish us from not us, self from not self. They describe what's not us so that we can navigate through the world. Now, the frontal lobes are the part, also those executive portions of the brain, also are self-limiting ideas that we're different, we're separate. They also are the seat of not only executive function, but a lot of worry, doubt, negativity. So I looked at the work of Dr. Andrew Newberg, then of the University of Pennsylvania, and he looked about on altered states, and he did also studies of Sufi monks in ecstatic prayer, of Buddhist monks in ecstatic prayer, and he found several brainwave signatures, very different from meditation, very different from meditation states. He found a quieting of those parietal lobes, he found a quieting of those frontal lobes, and a blurring of essentially me and not me. So I was fascinated by this. So I had one last thing I needed to do. I needed to find out what was going on with the brains of my Power of 8 participants. We found a global quieting of the frontal lobes and the parietal lobes, exactly what Andrew Newberg had found with his Sufi masters, exactly the same brainwave states as those Buddhist monks in ecstatic prayer. Those people go through disciplined practice for years and years and years. My people in Power of 8 studies had one 13-minute video from me. That was it. That was their full instruction. And they got into that state and all we did was 10 minutes of intention. They got into that state almost immediately. There was no other conclusion I could draw. Intending in a group somehow is a fast track to the miraculous. All you need is a group. Take a deep inhale and a deep exhale. And now on the inhalation, I want you to formulate that intention statement in your mind. Bring it down to your heart. Send it out through your heart. Remember during this intention to imagine that person being healthy and well with all of your 5 senses. Feel it, see it, hear it, taste it, smell it. That person being healthy and well in every way. Recipient, open up your heart to receive. Just gently keep going back to that intention statement every so often. Senders.
Amazed person in the room.
That's good, that's good. Yes, but it means actually that we go from the I to the we, you know?
Yes, exactly.
And that's what's changing the world. If we don't think it separate, like I need this, I need that, but we can do it together. Yeah.
Absolutely. I was very aware. I did a lot of work on that with my last book, The Bond.
Yeah.
Is all about that we were never meant to be competitive individuals and separate.
Yeah.
When we are, we suffer.
Yeah.
When we work together, we thrive.